the rabbis mandated that it was allowed, and that stuck over time. Whereas for the Ashkenazim, they didn't have that same issue with access to food. Therefore, it wasn't. It's not something that is part of the Ashkenazi tradition. It's very interesting though. So, what? Kidney, yes.
It's enough to eat on Pesach, even without kidney.
Right. It's so funny though. You do think you're gonna starve. You're like, what are we gonna eat?
I
mean, you can eat chicken,
potato. I don't eat meat. So I'm
Ah.
like, I eat a lot of these. I'm like, eat.
Right.
She said lettuce.
Lettuce does wonders.
Okay, let's begin.
Okay, excellent. So everybody has
Tofu.
source.
Can you eat tofu?
What?
Soy.
No, it's soy. Yeah.
Oh,
Soy.
true.
Burger.
So in the Haggadah, so the Haggadah is there's a seder to the seder, right? So what does seder mean?
Order.
Order, excellent, right? So there's a process and there's an order. So we have all these different steps. Does everybody know the steps? Okay, we're gonna run through them. So there's Kaddish, Orchatz. So Kaddish is it's the first when you first have your first cup of grape juice. Orchatz is when you wash your hands, but not for matzah.
We're gonna do this all next week.
Right. So yeah, don't worry. Yeah, I'm just gonna we're gonna go in detail next week. So don't worry. So don't even worry about it.
Wait, how do you spell that?
Right. So then Orchatz is washing your hands, getting ready to go to the next stage, which is karpas. So we're up to number 3. Karpas is when we take a vegetable or I don't know. People do potato, celery, radish. You dip it into salt water. So kadesh, Orchatz, karpas, yachatz. You break the matzah. Magid, which is the longest section, which goes through the whole slavery and kind of that's what we're going to focus on tonight. Magid rachza is before we wash our hands for motzi to eat the matzah. Motzi matzah when we eat the matzah. Maror, bitter herbs. Korech is when we make a little sandwich with I know you're herb, I'm herb, it's fine. Korech, shulchan orech, that's the time to rejoice because we're eating, right? Safun is the end of is right before benching. It's dessert, and dessert being matzah, yummy. Safun barech, which is benching. Hallel, which is praise, and yirtzah is when the conclusion. So those are all these steps that happen at the seder, but it's very detail focused around there being an order and a mechanism. So the question is, why do we have that type of structure that it's so order? It's mandated by this order. And Magid, which is the word Haggadah comes from that same root word, is this whole elaborate, I guess, recall of the story, how we got to Mitzrayim, how we left Mitzrayim, that God did all these amazing things, and it's quite a long section. And God did a lot of amazing things, which is why it's a little bit long. But there's a debate in the Gemara, there's a debate in the Talmud in Pesachim. And Rav and Shmuel are these 2 rabbis, and they both differ on what the Haggadah should be, what Magid should be, what process, what steps do we need to have in place in order to experience what Pesach is truly about. At the Seder table, there's actually a reference in the Haggadah to B'chol Dor V'Dor that in every single generation, Chayav Adam L'Rot Et Atzmo, that each person needs to see himself as if he left Egypt. So I don't know about you guys, but when I sit at the Seder, you can kind of relate to the slavery and you read through and you're like, oh, that's so sad, or that must have been so difficult, but it's hard to personally experience it. And we talked a little bit last week that unfortunately in our recent history we do have somewhat of a shibud Mitzrayim, of a slavery, akin to Egypt. So we have the Holocaust that happened. And very often, because it's more recent in history, you can kind of relate to the sting of slavery. It's a little bit more tangible to be able to understand the pain that the Jewish people experienced in Mitzrayim when we have that recent event in history. That being said, though, when you get to the Seder itself, it's like you've cleaned your house, you're out, I don't know, a lot of people travel outside the city, you're with your families, you're with your friends, and you're at the Seder. So what is it that we're supposed to experience? What is it that we're supposed to be moved to do? And what we'll do is today, we're going to take a look at these 2 approaches, Rav's approach and Shmuel's approach, and understand that when we are actually at the Seder, we go through a transformational experience. As the individual sitting here in the year 2013, if we're able to understand Rav and Shmuel's approach to what the Haggadah is, we're going to be able to experience the leaving of Egypt. We're going to be able, it's a transformative experience when we're able to dig in and understand what Magid is supposed to bring out of us.
Let's put the question out there, though. What are we meant to gain out of the Seder experience? Other than bitter herbs, some food, some wine, what are we meant to take away from it? Any thoughts? You haven't been to a Seder before? What do you take away from it? Other than
Overfull.
overeating and exhaustion.
Right,
Okay.
overeating, lots of wine, right.
Exhaustion.
We go through
Exhaustion.
these experiences in Judaism, these customs and all the festivals, but what are we meant to take away from this experience of sitting at a Seder table and retelling the story of the Exodus
Continuity
as a people?
as a people.
Okay. Any other ideas?
Right.
Freedom? Okay.
Yeah,
So,
here we go.
so let's look at the two approaches.
Yeah, we're going to take a look at these two approaches, and the idea behind what Magid and what the Haggadah is supposed to do is that we're not commemorating something that happened, we're recreating something that happened. And it's a very, there's a very special feeling that comes along with that we're going to see that we're not remembering something. So we're not celebrating or commemorating. We're really trying to recreate. And again, there's lots of symbols. There's lots of things that you do. You actually eat bitter herbs so that you cry, so that you force tears. It clears your sinuses also, but you force tears. You eat. You point to Pesach, Ze Pesach, Ze Matzah, Ze Maror. You point to it and say, this is the Passover. This is the Paschal offering, and then you say, this is matzah. This is what the Jews ate when they left Egypt. And Ze Maror, and this is the bitter herbs. You actually point. There's a lot of symbolism. The whole Seder plate. So the whole thing is very experiential and very interactive. And the idea behind it is that we're really supposed to recreate, not just commemorate. So let's take a look at starting at the top. I'm just gonna hold this spot. So we're gonna hold this in a second. Starting at the top. So Rav and Shmuel both agree, which is kind of shocking, right? So Rav and Shmuel agree that what happens, there are 5 steps. There are 5, I guess, layers and stages to what is going to create this recreation of an experience as opposed to commemorating an experience. So what is it? We're going to have a question. We're going to have an answer. We're going to have the search, which is going to, we'll get into it in a second. We're going to have the search, the symbols, and then ultimately the burst. And we'll explain what the burst is, okay? But the burst is a very exciting part of the Haggadah, okay? So let's first take a look at source number 1. This is all taken directly from the Haggadah, and I apologize, we don't have any Haggadahs right here now to take a look at, but I promise you can check afterwards. All of this stuff, this text is taken directly from the Haggadah. So the first one, has anybody ever heard this song? Ma nishtana halayla, has it, right? Right, so ma nishtana, right, we know this one? So let's read this out loud together. Or can I get somebody to read source number 1?
Lori.
Awesome, thank you.
What makes this night different from all other nights? On all nights we need not dip even once. On this night we do so twice. On all nights we eat chametz or matzah, and on this night only matzah. On all nights we eat any kind of vegetables, and on this night maror. On all nights we eat sitting upright or reclining, and on this night we all recline.
Excellent. So what do these 4 questions address? These different things. We're doing different things tonight than we do on all other nights. So why is that? So why are we doing these different things? So the Haggadah opens up with this question, right? So why is this night different from all other nights? And there's also a lot of emphasis. It's very interesting that you're supposed to. The Seder is geared towards children. That's what the tradition teaches. That you say, why is this night different from all the nights? And the youngest traditionally ask this question because you want to elicit conversation. You want kids to be attuned and realize that this night is different. So
that's why it's not a discussion. It's experiential. There are things to do to engage the children.
Absolutely, and I would say that we kind of blame it on the children, but it's totally for us. It's totally meant to, we're supposed to notice, why is this night different from all other nights? Why do I go about cleaning my house? Why do I go about, this craze of buying all this food? Why am I doing all of this? What makes tonight so significant? So again, I think we blame it on the children, but really I think we're supposed to treat ourselves as children in this case and pull ourselves back to a very naive, almost infant type of state that we can actually experience it, because children obviously have a very, this untainted perspective on the world and have this, this love and passion and desire to explore. So I think we're supposed to somehow dig into the child part of ourselves and experience it in that respect. So we have these 4 questions. So this is stage number 1. And so stage number 2, let's go to the second one. What's the answer? So why is this night different from all the nights, right? We eat matzah, we have maror, we recline. What's the answer? Answer is in number 2. Who wants to read number 2? Go for it, Dan.
We're slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, and the Lord our God took us out from there with a strong hand and with an outstretched arm. If the Holy One, blessed He, had not taken our fathers out of Egypt, then we and our children and our children's children would have remained slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. And if all of us were wise, all of us understanding, and all of us know the Torah, we would still be obligated to discuss the Exodus from Egypt, and everyone who discusses the Exodus from Egypt at length is praiseworthy. So why do we have all these interesting things we raised in source number 1? Because we were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. And why did we leave Egypt? For one reason, because God took us out of Egypt. And that's the question, and that's the answer.
Okay, so it's pretty simplistic. So we've got these 4 basic questions. I'm looking at the world. I'm looking at the world. I'm looking at my table, seeing these things. I'm asking a question, and the answer is very simple. Why is this night different from all other nights? Because we were slaves. We were slaves, and God took us out of Egypt. So now we're going on a search. Okay, source number 3.
Also taken from
Haggadah. And again, this is all part of Maggid, and we're going to see what the difference is between Rav and Shmuel. Rav and Shmuel each take, one takes a personal approach to the Seder, one takes a universal, like more macro approach to the Seder. We're going to explain it in a second and see how the two really go side by side and why we need both in order to ultimately create this or recreate this experiential environment.
I'm not sure we mentioned the context to a Rav and Shmuel.
Oh, correct. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Anyone know? 2 rabbis that are prominently featured in the Talmud. Talmud is a list of explanations and debates based on the oral law, based on the Mishnah, and many tractates of the Talmud. And Rav and Shmuel are 2 popular rabbis who we learn a lot from and we learn a lot about. And this is their debate on this topic in the tractate discussing the Haggadah. So that's the context of who they were. They're not alive today. They lived thousands of years ago. But we take a wonderful lessons from them, including this one tonight. Let's go on to the third source. Top of the page on page 2. Sorry for the page break between English and the Hebrew. That is definitely my fault. What do we learn? What is the search? What are we finding out? Go forth and learn what Lavan the Aramean wanted to do to our father Jacob. Pharaoh had issued a decree against the male children only, but Lavan wanted to uproot everyone. As it said, the Aramean wished to destroy my father. And he went down to Egypt and sojourned there, few in number, and became there a great nation, great and mighty and numerous. And he went down to Egypt, is the quote from the Torah, from the Bible, forced by divine decree, and he sojourned there. What does that mean? This teaches that our father Jacob did not go down to Egypt to settle, but only live there temporarily. Thus it is said, they said to Pharaoh, we have come to sojourn in the land. There's no pasture for our servants' flocks, because the hunger is severe in the land of Canaan. And now please let your servants dwell in the land of Goshen.
Excellent. So, very, very, very good reading. Okay, so question is, so when we have this search now, so we've got a question, right? So the question is, why is this night different from all other nights? Why do we have these, and again, we just pick these 4 symbols, but why do we have the leaning, the matzah, why do we have all of this? Very simple answer. Avadim hayinu leparo b'mitzrayim. We were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. Ah, but you ask, how did we get to Egypt? We have to go back a little bit, right? Because we didn't just show up in Egypt and become slaves. And we know this to be true for our lives. Like, how often do we look around? You're like, how did I get here? How did I get here? Right? So we look back and you can see a process. You see a trajectory. You see a path that has kind of made life what it is. So in order to understand what the slavery is all about, we have to understand how we got into slavery. So it says, go forth and learn what Lavan, right? So who's Lavan?
Which is just such it's such an important principle that I think we gloss over so often. We often find ourselves in situations, spiritually, in work, in our family lives, or whatever it is, and we get stuck in the situation that we're in. I don't go back and pan back and zoom out a little bit and think, you know what, not focusing on what I'm in now and how to deal with it, but how do I get in this situation? How can I learn from this experience, which is the approach we're taking now.
Absolutely, and it's such a remarkable thing to remember, I think, in general, but specifically also with the Seder, if we experience what the Exodus is all about, what slavery is all about, we don't want to have that again. We don't want to say in every generation we have to re-experience this, but we do, because old habits die hard. We don't necessarily take the appropriate steps we're supposed to take, and somehow we end up in the exact same place. So here it's taking this reflective approach with, how did we get here? Let's talk about it. How did we get here? And here it's going to give, it doesn't go back, all the way in history, but we're going to see that's going to be the other approach. But we're going to see here that it says, Jacob, there was a famine. Jacob needed food. That's how we got here. That's it, right? So it was Jacob needed food, we got here, and somehow things got bad. So, and as we're reading through this, that this text is supposed to like, make you question, like, how did we do this? So Jacob comes down to Egypt, right, and then Joseph is there, right, and Joseph becomes very powerful in the government, right, and Joseph dies, and Paro doesn't remember him. And Paro, the book of Exodus opens up with Vayakam melech hadash asher lo yadat Yosef, that a new king arose who didn't know or didn't remember Joseph. So this new king comes in, and slowly the Jewish people became enslaved. It wasn't something that happened overnight. It was this evolved. And we're supposed to go back there, because unless we go back and understand the reason for why we're even here, there's no way we can experience the slavery. There's no way we can experience the Exodus, because it's just words. But if we can't bring ourselves back there and go back to what initiated this experience, then we're not authentically experiencing what we're supposed to experience. Okay, so before we go to source number 4, we're going to skip around a little bit. Flip over to the next page. And we're going to do the number 1 now for Rav. We just did Shmuel's approach, and now we're going to have Rav's approach to the Haggadah. We're going to conclude with steps 4 and 5, because both of them agree that 4 and 5 are the culmination of the Seder, of Magid. Both of them agree on that, but they disagree on steps 1, 2, and 3. Now we're going to see why they disagree on steps 1, 2, and 3, and how we're supposed to, as the participants in the Seder, bridge this gap between what they're trying to focus on, and we'll explain it all in a second. So source number 1. Anybody want to read?
I can read it.
Awesome, thank you.
The Torah speaks of 4 children. One is wise, one is wicked, one is simple, and one does not know how to ask. The wise one, what does he say? What are the testimonies, that the statutes and the laws which the Lord our God has commanded you? You in turn shall instruct him in the laws of Passover. One is not to eat any dessert after the Passover lamb. The wicked one, what does he say? What is this service to you? He says, to you, but not to him. By thus excluding himself from the community, he has denied that which is fundamental. You therefore blend his teeth and say to him, It is because of this that the Lord did for me when I left Egypt. For me, but not for him. If he had been there, he would not have been redeemed. The simpleton, what does he say? What is this? Thus you shall say to him, With a strong hand the Lord took us out of Egypt from the house of slaves. As for the one who does not know how to ask, you must initiate him. As it is said, you shall tell your child on that day, it is because of this that the Lord did for me when I left Egypt.
Excellent, awesome. So number 1, how many sons do we have here?
4.
Awesome. So Shmuel, right, very good. So according to Rav, there are 4 sons. How many Manishtana questions are there?
4.
Excellent, awesome. So Rav and Shmuel are both they're both creating the same system, but taking 2 different approaches to that system. So here we also have 4. You can say they're kind of questions or reflections on people. And according to many of the commentaries, these four could be actual children, or these 4 could be representative of 4 different types of people, 4 different personality types. That there's a lot that goes into these 4 types of people. But either way, we have a wise son, a wicked son, a simple son, and one who doesn't even know how to ask. And the way Rav is approaching this from a much more macro perspective. So whereas Shmuel was about what's going on right here, like show me what this is. Why are we leaning? According to Shmuel, it's a very personalized approach. I'm sitting at the table, I see something, and I want to ask you why it is the way it is. Here, Rav almost like zooms out, and he's taking a much more macro approach, and he says there's 4 personality types. We're talking about much more macro. Why are these, the wise one says, what are the testimonies, the statutes, the laws? So he's not talking specific about why is there matzah at my table. He's talking very grandiose, very big picture. And we see that in response to these 4 questions, there's also a big picture response. So what's the response, the answer, in source number 2? And I apologize again, the English is on the following page. So what's the approach? So these four children or 4 personality types each ask, again, much more macro questions. So like not relating specifically to here right now, but just more macro. So what's the response? Anybody want to read?
I'll read.
Okay, thanks.
You're talking about
In the
right
beginning,
here, right? Okay.
yes, in the
Just want to
beginning.
make sure I'm on the same page.
Yes. We're good.
Gotcha. In the beginning, our fathers served idols, but now the omnipresent one has brought us close to his service. As it is said, Joshua said to all the people, "Thus said the Lord, the God of Israel, your fathers used to live on the other side of the river, Terach, the father of Abraham and the father of Nahor, and they served other gods. And I took your father Abraham from beyond the river, and I led him throughout the whole land of Canaan. I increased his seed and gave him Isaac, and to Isaac I gave Jacob and Esau. To Esau I gave Mount Seir to possess it, and Jacob and his sons went down to Egypt. Blessed is he who keeps his promise to Israel, blessed be he. For the Holy One, blessed be he, calculated the end of the bondage, in order to do as he had said to our father Abraham in the covenant between the portions, as it is said. And he said to Abraham, you shall know that your seed will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and they will enslave them and make them suffer for 400 years. But I shall also judge the nation whom they shall serve, and after that they will come out with great wealth."
Excellent. So the response here isn't Avadim Hayinu Lepar b'Mitzrayim. It's not we were slaves to Paro in Egypt. The questions are coming from a different place. The questions are being asked in a much more macro, much more big picture type of way. And the response is Mitchila of Avodah Zarah, way back when our great-great-great-great-grandparents were idol worshippers living in Mesopotamia. What happened? Abraham discovers God. That's how it all began, right? So again, you go back to the questions that are asked. The questions that are asked are, what are the testimonies, the statutes, the laws? The wicked one, what is this service to you? The simple one, what is this? That we're talking much bigger picture here. So instead of again, Shmuel's approach is personal. It's what is this to me? What does this matzah on the table mean for me? What does it mean? I was a slave in Egypt. But again, when we look at Rav's approach, it's why do we do this anyway? Forget the stuff that's on the table. Why do we even have the table?
It goes all the way back to the start.
It goes all the way back to the start, right? So we're going to go all the way back in time to when there were idol worshippers and what it meant and what it means for Abraham to find God and to create monotheism and to create this religion when that was completely against the curve and against what the norms of what people were doing in those days. So, and then how does that section end off? Again, this is in the answer section, so we're in the 2 of the 5 stages. In number 2 of the 5 stages, Baruch Shomer Haftachato Yisrael. God keeps his promise to Israel. God will always keep his promise. So it started way back when. There were idol worshippers. There was Abraham. God made a promise to Abraham. What was that promise? Your children will sojourn in a foreign land. And I'm going to save you, and I will always save you, and I will continue to save you. So that me sitting at my table today, this is relevant. So this isn't something that happened to Abraham way back when. It did happen to Abraham, but it's also happening to me now. Why? Because Baruch Shomer Haftachato Yisrael. Because God is going to consistently and going to constantly renew his promise, renew his covenant. That he promised Abraham he would never leave us alone, and he hasn't left us alone. And we have his mitzvot, and we have the Torah, and we have all these mechanisms and channels to get close to God and to cleave to God. But at the end of the day, Baruch Shomer Haftachato Yisrael, God will always keep his promise to the people, to the Jewish people, and that even if we're in the land of Egypt, and even if times look very dark, and we're in an enslaved environment, what do we have to do? We have to close our eyes and remember Baruch Shomer Haftachato Yisrael, that God will always be part of this process. So the way this answers the questions, again, is coming from a very different place than me asking about my particular Seder. So we have almost a side-by-side, reflection going on, one being me at my table and one being me as part of a greater nation. What is this all about? And we need both approaches in order to be able to internalize what the Seder is all about. Because if I just think about me, then I'm leaving out the generations of past and future generations. And if I'm only thinking about that, then it's not relevant to me. So Rav and Shmuel, you almost again need both, and we're going to see how they both kind of they're starting
Together.
Here and then they come together.
The burst.
The burst, and we're going to see what this burst is all about and what it is we're supposed to do. It's very exciting, the burst. Okay, so and then source number 3 is exactly the same one, correct? As let me just make sure, right? Correct.
So did you say who Laban was, or Laban?
Oh yeah, sorry. Lavan was Rivka's father. I'm sorry, Rivka's brother. Betuel was Rivka's father, and Lavan was Rivka's brother. So not such a nice guy. Lavan was the one who also tricked Jacob into his 7 years. He worked for Rachel, and he ended up giving him Leah. Story sound familiar? So he tricks, Lavan basically tricks Yaakov, and he has Yaakov work for 14 years in order to actually marry Rachel. So he tricked him with the, having Leah actually marry him. So the third is the same. So the third meaning the search. How we go about searching is going to be the same, because again, we almost need like rear view mirrors, right? So it's not enough to be looking forward. We have to also check what's going on behind us. I always think about rear view mirrors driving, that I can be safe on the road. That's great. But I need mirrors around me to see if other people are safe, and or just to make sure that I can be safe in contrast to them.
My grandfather used to say that to be a very alert driver, you have to have eyes in the front of your head, and the back of your head, and the side of your head. Because it's not about what you're doing; it's about what everyone else crazies on the road is
I'm
doing.
a perfect driver. It's all of that, right? It's everyone else that's not perfect. So right. So here again, what do we have? We have these rear view mirrors. We're looking back. So Tzei Ulamad. Ma bikesh Lavan ha'arami. We go back to Lavan. We go back to okay, I get it now. There was Terach, who was Abraham's father. Abraham finds monotheism. God and Abraham have this very special relationship. God promises that he'll never abandon us. He'll always be there with us. That the Jewish people will multiply like the stars in the sea and the stars in the sky and the and the sand in the sea. And both of them, Rav and Shmuel, where do they meet? They meet at, okay, that's great. We've got a universal approach. We've got this macro, grandiose approach to how are we who we are. And then there's the personal approach with me sitting at my table in year 2013. How can I make this relevant to me? Where do they meet? They meet at go forth and learn. You have to delve into your history. You have to delve into your experience, your family's history, to really understand and internalize how we got here and how we're going to be different, how we're going to change, how we're going to use this as a mechanism to learn for future. Any questions so far? Okay, fantastic. Right? Okay, so here we have stage 3. So stage 3 again is the same. That what happened? Jacob, but there was a famine, went down to Egypt. Okay, great. We know why we're here, right? We've established why we're here. Now, take a look at source number 4, and the 4 is the same for both. Again, the only reason I have it in here twice is for you to see how each have their own 5 stages, but 4 and 5, again, are going to be the same. Anybody want to read?
Short one.
It's very short.
Okay. Rabbi Gamel used to say, who does not discuss the following 3 things on Passover has not fulfilled her duty. Namely, 1, Passover, the Passover sacrifice, talking about what it was. 2, matzah, the unleavened bread. And 3, maror, the bitter herbs.
Right. No, it's Australian. Okay. So what happens here? What happens in stage number 4? So let's go to Shmuel for a second. Shmuel is the personal approach, okay? So let's follow his path, and then we're going to follow Rav's path. So Shmuel's path is, why is this matzah on my table? Why am I leaning? Right? Why am I eating these bitter herbs tonight? So why are we doing that? Right? So what's the answer? Avadim hayinu leparo b'Mitzrayim. We were slaves to Paro in Egypt. Why were we slaves to Paro in Egypt? Because Jacob, my great-great-great-grandfather, came down to Egypt because there was a famine and he was looking for food. Great. So once I know where I'm coming from, and I know where I am, and I'm looking around the table, all of a sudden something like snaps in me, and I'm like, Zeh Pesach. This is what it means. This is the sacrificial lamb. It's sitting at my table. Zeh matzah. This is it. And you actually engage in, and actually it's interesting because Rabbi Gamliel says if you don't discuss it, you haven't fulfilled your duty. So what happens is we almost shoehorn these obligatory pieces of the Seder into the experience because they're milestones. It tracks how we're doing on our experiential component of the Seder. Because if I'm experiencing it in the way it's meant to be experienced, then by the time I reach this point of Magid, by the time I reach this point of the Haggadah, I'm jumping out of my seat going, this is it, this is Pesach, and this is Matzah, and this is Maror. Why? Because I've experienced it. This is my personal Shibud Mitzrayim. This is my personal slavery, and it's ultimately my personal Geula. It's my personal redemption. So by the time, and again, it's an amazing thing that, so Rabbi Gamliel says, you don't fulfill your obligation unless you talk about it, unless you point to it and actively talk about it. So I can just sit back and be like this. But if I've taken the other steps really to heart in the way it's meant to be experienced, again, by the time I get to this point, I'm jumping out of my seat. I'm like, very excited. This is Pesach. This is what it's all about. This is what the slavery is about. That's why we're eating the maror. It becomes alive. And again, we take a look, and let's follow the same path with Shmuel, where we start with, why do we do this at all? forget Pesach. Why the laws? Why God? Why the Jewish people? Why all of this? It's okay. Let's go back in time. Mitchila of avodah zarah, right? So not avadim hayinu. We're not saying that that we were slaves in Egypt. We're going to go back further than that. We're going to take this universal macro approach with how do we get who's this Abraham person we speak of, right? So Abraham finds God. God in turn finds us. There's this dveikut, there's this stickiness, that sticky factor that we have with God, and the Jewish people have with God. And what happens ultimately when we get to the point? It's the same thing. I get it. I'm in this because God's in this too. We're partners in this. So where are we now at the Seder? Ze Pesach, ze Matzah, ze Maror. So we have almost the exact same response. So we're still jumping out of our seats, but we're jumping out of our seats because we understand the big picture and we understand why it's relevant to me and why it's relevant to me personally. Any questions? Okay, awesome. So and finally, this is awesome. So here we go with the burst. Okay, this will bring everything home together.
roll.
The drum roll. Okay, Hallel, right? Hallel is a section we have as part of the 15 steps of the Haggadah. It's 15, right? 14. Okay. So 15. So Hallel is an actual component of the Seder. There's no reason to be saying Hallel in Magid. Okay? Does everybody understand the question? Right? So we have all of these steps in the Seder, the order to the Seder. We already have a section. It's going to happen in like 3 or 4 hours from now, right? If we're sitting around the Seder table, we're up to Magid. We've still got to eat the matzah. We've still got to eat the maror. We're still going to eat our main meal. We're still going to have the afikomen. And then after benching, we're going to have a section on Hallel. What's Hallel? Hallel is praise to God. So Hallel is a tefillah. It's a prayer that we say on the festivals. We say it on Passover, on the holiday of Sukkot, and the holiday of Shavuot. We also say it on Rosh Chodesh. We say it on Hanukkah, and we also say it on Yom HaAtzmaut, Israel's Independence Day. So Hallel it's a structured prayer that we say at very specific times over the course of the calendar year, and we're going to say it tonight at the Seder in a couple of hours. Why on earth does Hallel appear in Magid? Okay, so this is where the burst comes in. So take a look at source number 5. So I'm just gonna I'll read it, but I'll take a look at because the Hebrew is just beautiful here. So it says Lefichach anachnu chayavim hodot lehalel leshabeach lefaer leromen lehader. I'll translate in a second. So this is now our duty. Now when it says therefore, right? So that's actually not thus. It's therefore. Therefore, it is our duty to thank God. So I'm not saying it's their duty to thank God. It's not the people who actually experienced the Exodus. It's not Moses we're talking about. Moses doesn't have to thank God. I have to thank God. Why do I have to thank God? Because at this point, again, if I've taken these steps and internalized all of these pieces, at this point, I just got taken out of Egypt. It wasn't them, it's me. Lefichach anachnu chayavim. Therefore, I right now, again, I've jumped out of my seat at stage 4 already, right? So ze Pesach, ze Matzah, ze Maror. I've pointed to it. We're talking about it. We're engaged in conversation. So what happens? I have this spontaneous expression of gratitude to God. That's why Hallel appears in Magid, because we experience this. I get it. I get why we're here. I get why we're doing this. God believes in us. We believe in God. God has this Baruch Shomer Havtachato Yisrael. God has kept His eternal promise to the people. Lefichach anachnu chayavim. Therefore, it is now. It's not them. It's me. I right now, through this experience, through recreating, through the symbols, through this universal macro approach, and through this personal relevant approach, I am now experiencing the Exodus from Egypt. So it is now our duty to thank God, to laud, to praise, to glorify, to exalt, to adore, to bless, to elevate, and to honor the one who did all these miracles for our fathers and for us. Not just for our fathers, but also for us. He took us from slavery to freedom, from sorrow to joy, and from mourning to festivity, and from deep darkness to great light, and from bondage to redemption. Let us therefore recite before Him Hallelujah, praise God. And from there, the Haggadah, I didn't put this part in, but the Haggadah goes into the actual part of Hallel. That again, through this experience, by the time we get to this point, we're singing, we can't sing loud enough. And we're expressing our deepest gratitude because you saved me. So it's a very remarkable thing. I don't know if has anybody ever taken acting classes before? Or done any type of theater? So in acting, there's this, what's called getting into character, right? So when you get on stage, I'm not I'm not Rachel. I'm Cinderella, right? So that's who I'm performing, and I know, right? Exactly, my alter ego. So when I get on stage, I am not acting that person. I am that person. That there's this whole process of, and again, I can just compare it to I think about theater. Like my dad actually was one of the producers of The Fantastics. Which is super fun. It's a great show. You should see it. And there's a union house rule among all Broadway theaters that half an hour before showtime, no one's allowed backstage except for the actors and the stage manager. Why? Because the actors are getting into character. Some of them do vocal warm-ups, some are doing yoga, some are meditating, some are doing nothing, whatever. Everybody has their own way of getting into character. But by the time you, sitting in the audience, are watching your show, again, let's go like Les Mis, just because it's such a great movie also. But by the time Jean Valjean comes out, he's not so and so being Jean Valjean. It's Jean Valjean that's on stage. So there's an amazing experience that happens, and this is supposed to bring us to get into character. That we're not acting. I'm not pretending I'm at a Seder. I'm part of the Exodus. I've gotten into character. These steps are what help me to achieve an experience, and these steps are what help me to achieve recreation of what Shibud Mitzrayim was and what Geulat Mitzrayim was, the being redeemed and the slavery and being redeemed. There's an idea brought down in the Gemara that's also replicated here. That's Matchil Bignut U'Mesayim B'Shevach. That we start off with the negative and you always end on the positive. So it's very nice the Gemara says this. We also know this to be true in anything that constructive criticism. I don't know. You always end on a high note. So again, when it starts out, we've got these questions, and then there's the reminder of how we got to where we got, that it wasn't by accident, and there were mistakes along the way, and there were things we could have done differently. But all things aside, this is where we are right now. We're in Mitzrayim. It's bad. We're in the slavery. We're in bondage. It's bad. So again, you kind of go through this like downslope of like this where we are experiencing the pain, and then you're almost on this up curve of, but now we're being redeemed, and now we're part of this story and history in this moment in time where we're one with God again. Baruch Shemer Havtachat Yisrael, that God is keeping His promise to us, and He's constantly keeping His promise to us. And again, by the time we get to this high point, it's Shevach. So we're talking about praise. So Matchil Bignut, we start out with the negative, we start out with the introspection, we start out with how did I get here, and then Mesayim B'Shevach, and we end up on a high note of praise. Because if we understand where we've come from, I can understand where I'm going. And I can understand about spontaneously opening up and just singing my heart's delight because I've just experienced something. So it's a remarkable thing that Rav and Shmuel, it's funny, when you read through the Gemara, it sounds so technical, like this one says this and this one says this, but if you take a look at what it is that we're trying to create with the Seder, they make perfect sense. And that you need both in order to bridge the gap between the two. So we need the personal relevance, obviously, because without personal relevance, it doesn't mean anything to me. But we also need the universal approach. We need to understand how I am part of this greater picture in history and part of the greater the nation of the Jewish people. So any questions?
We wanted to conclude with a few extra minutes to have some Q&A about Passover related things, and we're getting a lot of emails and queries. The general feeling is to freak out over Pesach preparations, not knowing where to start, what necessarily to do. So we wanted to end a little bit early on purpose. If anyone has any particular questions, whether it's their own personal preparations at home, some people are challenged with the roommates that don't want to observe Passover to the same extent, or what to use your utensils, or not, feel free to open up with any questions, or use it as a chance to get out early. Either way, no offense.
So just like box up my dishes and silverware and use plastic and
So
paper plates.
the easiest way is to be part of the disposable society in which we are living, which is to get environmentally friendly.
Yes,
Recycled.
recycled.
Recyclable paper
But you don't have
goods.
to box. You could just close off.
no.
Just close.
Yeah.
Cap it. You don't have
We-
to actually
We
take
share
dishes out.
my roommate and I share
Uh-oh.
stuff.
Right. So what most people do, a lot of it is for education, for kids who are learning about Pesach, is they put big signs and don't open this cupboard. It contains chametz. It contains 11 products that you can't eat on Passover. You should maybe put a sign for your roommate so they know. But you don't have to box things up and take them to the basement
Well,
storage. You
she's
don't
not
have to do
Jewish,
that.
so
Right.
she's.
So you don't have to throw it away? But
No,
it's
we're talking about utensils.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
In terms of food,
Yeah.
so there's a prohibition not to derive any benefit from any chametz, and also to own chametz on Pesach. So what we do is we sell our chametz. It's a funny loophole that we rely on every single year. We sell our chametz to somebody who's not Jewish, with the intention that hopefully after Passover that they will sell the chametz back to us. Usually the rabbis say, wait an hour after Pesach so you can go and take your chametz out and use it. There was a story last year in the community of Woodmere that the person who they sold the chametz to went knocking on people's doors to get their alcohol. He was an alcoholic, they didn't know. And they rightfully had to give him the alcohol because they didn't own it, which is funny. But
Wow.
you're going to sell your chametz. So when we say sell your chametz, if you have a bottle of Heinz ketchup in your fridge and it's 3/4 used, you have a little bit left, it's not really, it has no value to it. You're not going to sell it. So people say the best thing to do is either wind down your perishable items, or chuck them, or right. But if it's something like if it's truffle oil, 1/4 of a can of truffle oil has more value than 1/4 of a container of ketchup. So that answers both the utensils and the perishable goods.
And do you actually have to sell? Does there need to
Paperwork.
be
Yeah,
a
you
money
have to sell
exchange?
it. Yeah, so you don't have to give.
Yeah, but they
Just
usually
draw a
like
little card.
KJ will does like
Oh.
KJ
Oh,
will can
okay.
yeah.
Yeah,
So it's
email-
not like you go to your neighbor and say like, hey, give me a contract.
Take this
Right, yeah.
stuff.
Yeah, you can do it online.
It's all yours,
You
right?
can do it
exactly.
online, and the
You
email
physically have to-
that Rabbi Eli sent out today included a link of how to sell it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And a customer, you give a
But
donation
don't do that
to the
because you'll lose all
shul's.
your stuff.
Yeah.
I'm gonna get
You give a donation to the benevolent fund of the shul, and you make the sale. It's actually a
Okay.
contract. Any other questions?
But if it's a perishable that you're gonna keep your truffle oil and you're going
And you
to
put it
keep
to the back of your if it's in your refrigerator, and you only have one refrigerator because we live in Manhattan apartments, so we're not blessed with multiple extra rooms. So you take all your products that you're going to keep, your blue vein cheese and all the things that are expensive, put them in the back or the front, and sort of put them in a plastic bag, tie them up so you know that they're separate over Passover, and then you can still use your fridge. Clean out your fridge. When we're talking about fridges, most people line the refrigerator shelves, clean them out. I haven't looked in everyone's refrigerator, but some people have spillages and so on. So clean out all the residue of food. Make sure that it's sparkling. Windex does a great job with the paper towel. And some people line the shelves. You don't necessarily have to, but again, it's a nice thing to do. And that's what you should do with things in their fridge.
Do you have a favorite site of what's PESACH and what's not favorite website?
Website?
That
In terms of products in the supermarket. So I actually find living in New York and living in America to be tremendously helpful to Pesach observance. For those of you that have not lived anywhere else and tried to observe Pesach, and I grew up in Australia where it's very challenging, we have plenty of kosher food, but we don't have the symbols on kosher food to know what's kosher and what's not. You walk into a supermarket here, anywhere in Manhattan, and there's a whole Pesach aisle, and they basically tell you what's kosher. And even your normal cottage cheeses and milks have printed on them. And normal brands will say kosher for Passover. It's amazing.
Everything has to say kosher.
Not everything has to. Like
Oh, well.
100% olive oil doesn't need a kosher certification, and water, and there's certain things that don't, but all things that have a level of manufacturing to them should. And it's very easy to find them in supermarkets.
Right.
A popular
Not
site
fruit
is
or
a guide.
veggies.
The Orthodox Union puts out a
Fruits and
guide.
vegetables are fine.
Fresh, yeah.
Fresh, right, fresh, exactly.
well, for example, you look through your cupboards and you have various types of vinegar. Sometimes you have wine vinegar.
So things that are open, the general consensus is if it's open and it's used during the year, to not use it during the month of the week of Pesach. That's not to say that it contains chametz, but because it's open, there's a chance that it came in contact with chametz. So those things we put away, I wouldn't use. The Orthodox Union, the OU puts out as you can find it online. I can send them the link. They guide to all the Passover products, which is very easy to follow. In the supermarket, there's a website that has all the kosher restaurants and supermarkets that are available and open in Manhattan. So it's pretty easy, all at your fingertips. There's probably even an app that can do it all for you as well. Any other
Fresh
questions?
jerk also has like a whole section.
Passover,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah, have a whole section there. For 30% more expensive. But
Right, always a markup.
any other questions? Pesach? No. It can seem cumbersome and intense, but it really doesn't have to be. People, as I mentioned earlier, get very scared and frantic about how to keep Pesach, their roommates at their workplace. It's very doable, and we can still eat.
Besides lettuce.
Yeah, so please feel free to contact either Rachel, I, or Rabbi Weinstock, or anyone with any extra questions. Next week we'll go through a full model Seder, most likely on the 3rd floor, and give out a large packet and go through some explanations, some ideas behind all the 15 steps. Have a wonderful week, and look forward to seeing everyone on Shabbat.
Thank you.
Shabbat.
Oh, just
Shabbat. No, just Shabbat.
Just a regular.
I know.
Regular Shabbat.
No birth.
No birth.
It'll be good though, because I'm just bread and a fish. And I'm working really
I was
hard.
excited when they actually put this. I was
I'm working
last
on
year.
it. Yeah, I wanted, my intention is full